stop everything. This is not a small shift. This is not routine politics. This is a warning signal flashing across North America. President Donald Trump is under serious pressure tonight as Canada begins moving away from major U.S. banks. From the very first minute of this story, understand this clearly. When Canada adjusts its financial ties, it is not just paperwork. It is power. It is leverage. It is a message. Canada has long depended on American banks for large transactions, cross-border investments, and financial security systems. For decades, the United States has been the center of North American banking strength. But now, Canadian leaders are quietly building alternatives. They are increasing partnerships with European banks. They are strengthening domestic banking channels. They are reducing reliance on U.S. financial institutions. Why does this matter? Because money is influence, banking is control. When countries trust your banks, they trust your stability. When they step away, they are sending a signal. This move comes at a time when President Trump is already facing pressure over trade negotiations, tariffs, and tense diplomatic talks. Canadian officials have voiced concerns about unpredictability in Washington. Markets do not like unpredictability. Investors do not like sudden policy swings. The pressure is not loud. It is not dramatic, but it is real and it is growing. Tonight, the question is simple. Is this the beginning of a financial shift that weakens America's grip in the region? Or is it a temporary move, driven by political tension? One thing is clear. When your closest neighbor starts moving its money elsewhere, the ground under your feet begins to shake. And the tremors are just beginning. Here is what makes this moment different. Canada is not an enemy nation. It is America's largest trading partner. Billions of dollars move across that border every single day. Cars, oil, grain technology, and behind all of it, banks. For years, U.S. banks handled major portions of Canadian corporate financing. American financial systems helped settle international payments. U.S. dollar transactions flowed easily. The system was smooth. But now, Canadian policymakers are talking about diversification. That word sounds calm. It sounds technical. But in global finance, diversification often means distancing. Reports show that Canadian financial institutions are expanding agreements with European clearing systems. They are exploring more settlements in euros and other currencies. They are strengthening domestic payment rails to reduce exposure to U.S.-based risk. This is not random. It comes after disputes over tariffs on steel, energy policy disagreements, and heated trade talks. President Trump has taken a hard line in negotiations, often pushing aggressive economic leverage. Canada appears to be responding with quiet financial strategy. Instead of loud speeches, they are adjusting systems. Instead of threats, they are shifting infrastructure. And here is why that matters deeply. Once financial systems are changed, they are hard to reverse. Companies build new relationships. Contracts shift. Habits form. If Canadian firms become comfortable operating outside U.S. banking dominance, that could reduce American financial influence long term. Wall Street is watching. Investors are watching. The White House is watching. Because pressure does not always come as a headline scandal. Sometimes it comes as steady erosion. And erosion, over time, reshapes landscapes. Let's be clear about the stakes. The United States dollar remains the world's dominant currency. U.S. banks remain among the most powerful financial institutions on earth. That has given America enormous strength in trade negotiations and global politics. When allies rely on American banks, Washington has leverage. Sanctions work. Financial restrictions carry weight. Policy decisions echo globally. If Canada reduces that reliance, even slightly, it weakens that automatic influence. Experts say this shift is partly about risk management. Canadian officials want protection against sudden policy changes from Washington. Under President Trump, policies have moved quickly and sometimes sharply. Tariffs can appear overnight. Trade terms can change. From Canada's point of view, building financial independence lowers exposure. From the White House's point of view, it may look like a vote of caution, or even doubt. And perception matters. Financial markets react to confidence. If confidence slips, borrowing costs can rise. Investment can slow. Even small changes can ripple outward. Already, some analysts warn that if other allies follow Canada's path, the United States could face gradual weakening of its financial centrality. This is not collapse, this is not crisis, but it is strategic repositioning, and strategy shapes the future. President Trump has built much of his economic message around strength, dominance, and leverage. If Canada's move gains traction, critics may argue that American economic power is being tested. Supporters may counter that competition keeps the system strong. Either way, the pressure is undeniable, because when a trusted partner adjusts course, it forces reflection, and reflection can lead to change. Now consider the political timing. President Trump is navigating complex negotiations not only with Canada, but with multiple global partners. Trade disputes have created friction. Allies are recalculating relationships. Canada's move could influence those talks. If Canadian leaders signal that they are less dependent on U.S. financial systems, they may gain negotiating room. They may feel less vulnerable to economic pressure from Washington. That changes the balance at the table. Inside the United States, lawmakers are watching closely. Some argue that tough trade tactics strengthen America. Others warn that pushing allies too hard can drive them away. This banking shift feeds that debate. Economic influence is not just about size. It is about trust. It is about stability. It is about predictability. If partners feel uncertain, they look for backups. And backups can become permanent alternatives. Markets today remain stable. There is no panic. But financial leaders understand trends. They track patterns. And this pattern suggests caution from one of America's closest partners. President Trump faces a delicate situation. Respond too aggressively, and tensions may rise. Ignore it, and influence may slowly drip. The White House has not yet made a strong public statement on Canada's banking diversification. But behind closed doors, discussions are likely intense, because economic relationships built over decades do not shift lightly. And when they do, it signals something deeper than routine policy adjustments. It signals changing confidence. Here is the larger picture. The global financial system is slowly evolving. Countries are exploring digital currencies. Regional banking alliances are growing stronger. Nations want more control over their own economic destiny. Canada's move fits into that wider pattern. But when it involves the United States, it carries extra weight. For generations, America's banking dominance has been a pillar of its global leadership. It allowed swift financial responses to crises. It strengthened diplomatic influence. It made the dollar a safe haven. If that dominance begins to face even small cracks, policymakers take notice. President Trump now stands at a crossroads. He can view Canada's shift as a minor adjustment, or he can see it as an early warning. Pressure in politics rarely explodes overnight. It builds quietly. It gathers in reports, meetings, data charts. Tonight's story is about that quiet build. Canada is not walking away from the United States. Trade continues, cooperation remains. But the financial safety net is being rewoven with more threads that do not run through American banks. That is significant. The coming weeks will reveal whether this is a cautious experiment or the start of a broader realignment. But make no mistake, when your closest ally begins strengthening alternatives to your financial system, it is not just business. It is a signal. And President Trump is feeling that signal tonight. Now the pressure tightens. Inside Washington, economic advisors understand one simple truth. Financial leadership is not guaranteed. It is earned every single day through stability and trust. If Canada continues building stronger financial pathways outside U.S. banks, other nations may study that model. Allies in Europe, partners in Asia, even smaller economies that once depended almost fully on American systems. And that is where the pressure grows heavier for President Trump. Because this is not only about Canada, it is about the example Canada sets. If one close ally successfully reduces dependence without economic damage, it proves something powerful. It proves that alternatives can work. That possibility shifts the conversation. Supporters of the president argue that strong negotiation tactics forced better deals. They say short-term discomfort leads to long-term gain. They believe America remains too powerful to be weakened by them. Adjustments like this. Critics warn that strength without reassurance can create distance. They say allies value consistency. They say economic relationships thrive on predictability. In financial markets, perception becomes reality very quickly. If investors believe partnerships are cooling, they adjust risk. If corporations sense tension, they hedge exposure. If banks anticipate lower cross-border flows, they revise forecasts. None of this is dramatic on the surface, but beneath the surface, calculations change. President Trump must now weigh whether to soften tone, reinforce ties, or double down on leverage. Every option carries consequence, and the world is watching carefully. Consider the business community. Major corporations on both sides of the border rely on smooth banking channels. Energy companies move billions. Auto manufacturers operate across supply chains that stretch from Ontario to Michigan. Technology firms settle payments in seconds. If financial routes become more complex, costs can rise. Executives prefer certainty. They prefer stable systems that do not shift with political winds. Canada's strategy appears built around reducing vulnerability to sudden policy swings. By spreading financial exposure across multiple global partners, they create insurance. Insurance against sanctions. Insurance against tariff escalations. Insurance against political surprise. For President Trump, that signals caution from a longtime partner. And caution in politics often means reduced trust. Still, it is important to remember this. America's financial system remains enormous. U.S. banks remain deeply connected worldwide. The dollar still dominates global reserves. But dominance is not permanent by default. History shows that financial centers rise and fall over decades. London once ruled global finance without challenge. Then New York rose. Now other centers are growing. This moment may be small in scale, but large in symbolism, because symbolism can accelerate trends, and trends can reshape power. There is also the diplomatic layer. Canada and the United States share one of the longest peaceful borders in the world. Their economies are deeply intertwined. Military cooperation remains strong. Intelligence sharing continues. But economic tension can spill into broader relationships. If financial trust weakens, negotiations on other issues become harder. Trade deals grow more complex. Climate agreements slow. Security cooperation feels stretched. President Trump has often emphasized America First policies. That message resonates strongly with his base. It signals national strength and independence. Yet allies hearing that message may also interpret it as distance. Canada's banking diversification may be a quiet response to that perception. Not a break, not a confrontation, but a hedge. And hedging changes dynamics. In Washington, strategic planners understand this well. Influence is strongest when partners feel secure, not cautious. The coming months will test whether this move leads to open dialogue or deeper quiet shifts. The White House may seek reassurance. Canadian officials may seek clarity. But until confidence is fully restored, the pressure remains. Because even silent adjustments can speak loudly in global finance. Financial analysts now ask an important question. Could this affect the US dollar? Right now, the answer is no immediate threat. The dollar remains strong. Global reserves remain high. International contracts still rely heavily on it. But influence erodes slowly, not suddenly. If more trade between Canada and other regions begins settling in non-dollar currencies, even in small amounts, it chips at dominance over time. President Trump faces this reality in the middle of a complex political environment. Domestic debates over economic policy are intense. Global rivals are watching closely. China has pushed for alternatives to dollar-based systems. Europe has discussed strengthening its own financial independence. Canada's move adds another data point. Again, this is not crisis language. This is strategic language. Pressure does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And whispers can carry far when repeated often enough. For the administration, the key question becomes how to maintain leadership while preserving partnerships. That balance defines modern economic power, and it is being tested. Tonight, the headline is simple but powerful. Canada is building financial options beyond US banks. And President Trump feels the weight of that shift. This is not about panic. It is not about collapse. It is about positioning. Canada is positioning itself for flexibility. The United States must now decide how to respond. Will Washington reinforce financial ties with renewed cooperation? Will negotiations ease tensions? Or will both nations continue adjusting quietly in separate directions? Economic power is strongest when trusted. Banking dominance thrives when partners feel secure. If confidence wavers, even slightly, change begins. President Trump's leadership is being measured not only by stock market numbers or headline deals, but by how allies react behind the scenes. Canada's move is one reaction. It is calm, it is strategic, and it carries meaning. The next chapter will depend on dialogue, policy choices, and trust, rebuilt or further tested. For now, one thing is certain. When your closest neighbor strengthens alternatives to your financial system, it sends a message. And that message is being heard clearly in the White House tonight.